Alright guys, so a video for April 16th, 2020. Two things today. One of them is one of the key concepts, so 3.3 belief systems. The other one is just going to be updates on your DBQ that you guys are supposed to be doing tomorrow. So in case you already checked Google Classroom, I did upload the assignment, but you won't be able to see it until 11 o'clock tomorrow. So I'll have more information at the very end of the video regarding the instructions on how to access that information, how you're going to submit the information. It's kind of like a dry run or a practice run for us because since your AP exam is online, it's going to be a good kind of way for you guys to go through the motions of what it's going to be like that day, because that day you're going to have to log in at a certain time, you're going to have to submit by a certain time, and then you have to do pretty much everything digitally or electronically. And so I'll go further into detail, but let me go through the concepts first, and then if you guys have any questions, you can always contact me, email me, and let me know if you have anything else you want to ask. Alright, so 3.3 has to do with, we're still kind of like focusing on empires, but this one has a lot more to do with the belief systems and the religion that was going around at this point. And so the context behind that is that in Europe and other places of the world, I'm going to say Europe because we're going to focus a lot of the European part. We're going to focus a little bit on the Middle Eastern part, but mostly it's going to focus on European changes or European conflict having to deal with religion. So the context behind this is that religion is an extremely driving force behind empire building. Empires are built on the basis of religions. The king, the monarch, whoever is in charge usually uses religion to solidify his rule and to make sure that people know he's in charge, but also the church acts as kind of like a backup, if you will. They legitimize and they give power to these kings by whether they say they claim that their power comes from God, or that their power is because they were chosen or they're in a line of succession, or whether they have political backing and religious backing from the church. All of it's kind of really interconnected. So it can go one of two ways. Either the church is going to act as a unifier in some places, it's going to help unite the kingdom, or it's going to act as a divisive element, which means it's going to basically divide the church or divide the people. So the other thing, sorry, I had to pause really quick because Ariel came running through. Alright, so religion is extremely important. So much so far in that, I got jumbled. That always happens, but little ones. Anyways. Some monarchs are even going to convert religion because they feel like it's going to actually help unify their empires and unify their kingdoms, and they don't want war either to continue or to break out. So one example is you have Henry IV of France, who's actually going to convert to Catholicism because he was afraid of what it would mean for his people. So you're going to see conversion of some monarchs. And so this time period in history is also marked by what we call the schisms or the Great Schisms. Schism is a fancy way of saying split. So you're going to see two different splits, one in Christianity, or more specifically Catholicism, and the other one is also going to be in Islam. So first we'll get to the Protestant Reformation. Let me move myself here a little bit so you can see what it says there on the bottom. Alright, perfect. So as Europe shifted from feudalism to a centralized government, the corrupt Catholic Church began to face many challenges. And it does say corrupt Catholic Church. Many people were becoming very disenchanted with the church. The church was doing things that are not right or correct. People were buying their way into certain offices. The church was becoming extremely wealthy, forgetting its responsibilities to the people. There was a lot of corruption. There was a lot of shady kind of deals happening between monarchs and priests and cardinals and popes and bishops and people in very, very high positions of power, and people were acknowledging that. And the more information that was being spread, the more people were being made aware that things were happening in the church that are not supposed to be happening. So actually, the rise of literacy, which we talked about having to do with Johannes Gutenberg and the printing press, with people reading more, people become more aware of the situation and what is going on. So the church is actually going to face a lot of challenges during this time. A lot of these reform movements were unsuccessful. At one point, the church even moved to France in what's known as Babylonian captivity. That's basically when the French kings captured the Pope. The Pope left Rome because he figured it would be safer for him. There was some riots and there were some things happening. And so he leaves Rome to go to France thinking he's going to be safe. But what ends up happening is that the French rulers actually kind of hold him hostage and make him stay there. And a bunch of French cardinals are elected into very high positions of power. And pretty much, I want to say like for the next 8 or 9 popes that come during that time period, they're all French in origin. Coincidence? I don't really think so. So you're going to see lots of lack of balance in power, pretty much. And then a lot of people are going to still blame the church for the Black Death, the fact that the Black Death killed so many people. Some people will say it was a curse or a plague from God. Some people did blame the Jews and that they poisoned the water, but the majority of the responsibility is actually going to fall with the Catholic Church, and they feel like the Catholic Church really, really failed them during this time. So the Protestant Reformation is marked by a couple of notable, important men during this era. So the first one is John Wycliffe. I have a picture of him on the next page. John Wycliffe was a big advocate of the Bible being translated into English. Previously, the Bible was only in Latin, and so only if you were educated did you know how to read it and could you understand it. Other than that, you had to have a priest interpret the text for you, because priests were educated, they understood Latin, they spoke Latin, and therefore the priest would interpret it for the people, and that's why, or the purpose of going to Mass was centered around the priests and the establishment of the church. Wycliffe said you don't need that. He translated the Bible into English, and then people could read it because it was in the everyday language. And therefore, if now people can read it for themselves, priests are not necessary for salvation. So that was one of the things that he advocated for. Martin Luther is going to be another one. He really disliked the practice of what was called indulgences. An indulgence is basically when you commit a crime, you commit a sin, you do something bad, and you pay to essentially have it removed. So kind of like a traffic fine, if you will. If you had enough money, you could pay the church to have this blemish, to have this dark spot removed from your soul, and then you could maybe even possibly be guaranteed, a seat in heaven. Did the priests actually have the authority to do this? No. And so it's one of the biggest things that Martin Luther and other people like him, like-minded people, are going to take offense with, especially when the church is doing this. The second thing is simony, which I talked about, the buying of church offices. Family members, very, very wealthy family members, would pay to have their sons, to have their children put in high positions of power, because at the time, the church is one of the most powerful organizations in all of the world. And so having a family member in a high position of power in the church puts your family in a high position of power. And so the fact that you could basically buy a religious office didn't sit well either, because religion is supposed to be something that you choose based on your faith, based on what kind of person you want to be, and the idea that you're going to spread those same ideas and those same beliefs to other people and your followers. Martin Luther believed in what was called sola fide, which basically means faith alone. You don't need the Mass, you don't need the rituals, you don't need the traditions, you don't need the fancy garments, you don't need all of the things that the Catholic Church says you need. You just need to have a relationship and a connection with God. And he basically outlined all of his disagreements, all of his qualms, everything that he had, not necessarily against the church, but his disagreements with the church in what was called the 95 Thesis. One of the important things to remember also about Martin Luther is that he really thought women should have more of a role in religion. Since women are the caregivers and the providers in the home, it's their job to continue that line of teaching to the children, and therefore they should also receive some kind of religious education as well. John Calvin is going to break with the Catholic Church, and he creates Calvinism. He believed in plain living, simple buildings. Most of the governance is done by church officials, so the high elders, if you will. Calvinism is eventually going to morph into what is known as Puritanism. The word Puritanism comes from the word pure, because the goal was for these people to purify themselves and the religion from all of the traditions and all of the holdings of the Catholic Church. And the Puritans are eventually going to move to the New World. And you get the famous ones that come off on Mayflower and things like that. The Calvinists believe that there are a certain group of people known as the elect. And these elect are predestined to go to heaven. So these people are already chosen way in advance. God already knows who these people are. And it's predestiny. It's already been decided who is going and who is not. And there's a typo. Oops. It should be the God favored hard work. Excuse me, not word. Then you have Anglicanism. Anglicanism is a little bit different, and it's a little bit longer, so it's a very short description, but I'm going to go into story time on the next slide. So Anglicanism is created when Henry VIII wanted a divorce from the Catholic Church. He wanted a divorce from his wife, and the Catholic Church wouldn't have it. So he created the new Church of England, free of control of the Pope. So story time on the next slide. All right, so up there you have Martin Luther. He was originally from German territory. And he created the religion Lutheranism. He actually really didn't want to create a new religion. He wasn't trying to reform or what do you call it? Destroy the Catholic Church. He just wanted them to change the things that they were doing. He was a devout person himself, but at one point, because of the fact that he caused so much trouble, the Pope excommunicated him and kicked him out of the church, basically. And so that's why he kind of goes on to create this idea of Lutheranism. On the bottom, you have John Wycliffe, which is the guy that translated the Bible into English. And then you have Henry VIII, who's right there in the middle. He's the guy that I did a huge lecture on for you guys in class. He had 6 wives. One of his wives is actually there at his feet begging him not to divorce her. That's his first wife. And then really sadly, right next to that is the woman who is holding like what looks like a handbag-ish kind of thing. And if you notice really closely on her handbag, the initials H and A are already carved in. That was his mistress. Her name was Anne Boleyn. He wanted to divorce his first wife so he could marry Anne Boleyn, because he believed that his new younger wife could give him legitimate sons to carry on the bloodline. His first wife did not give him any surviving sons. They had many, many children, but they all did sadly die. They only had one daughter that survived into adulthood, and he did not want England to be under the control of a woman. He was very afraid of what would happen, and he felt like a failure if he didn't pass the dynasty on to a surviving legitimate male heir. And so he wanted a divorce really, really, really strongly. The Pope would not give him a divorce, and so he just kind of says, you know what, fine, you're not going to listen to me. I'm going to break with the church. I'm going to make my own church. I'm going to make myself head of the church. I don't need you. Bye. And he does basically what he wants to do. So it's for that reason that he creates this whole radical movement in England that's going to cause a lot of chaos for many, many years to follow. So the Counter-Reformation. It's kind of hard to see at the top. Let me see if I can move this a little bit. There we go. The Counter-Reformation is basically the Catholic Church's response to the Protestant Reformation and other types of Reformation. So the Counter-Reformation is done in 3 different sections. The first one is the Inquisition. This is where extremely religious, hardcore people believe in punishing non-believers. So when you hear the terms Inquisition, it usually is associated with really, really negative consequences. Torture, burning at the stake, hanging, witch hunts, really, really bad stuff. It's a dark time in history. So it's basically punishing people for not believing in the one true Catholic faith. The second one is going to be the mission of the Jesuits. So the Jesuits get their name because they are followers of Jesus, and they're supposed to live lives very similar to Jesus. They undertook a missionary activity in the Spanish Empire as well as Japan and India, and then they continued to spread Catholicism to all parts of the world. The Jesuits were scholars, and their idea was to spread the faith by living a life of poverty, but also a life of like community service, like giving back to the people, giving back to the poor, and helping the people. And through those practices, hopefully getting people to convert back to the church. The very, very last one was the Council of Trent. This actually lasted for a really, really long time. It was an organization of all of the major high leaders in the Catholic Church. They were trying to basically say, like, I acknowledge, like, we understand you guys have a bunch of disagreements with us. How can we do this? How can we fix this? How can we make it better? And really not a whole lot got done. So a couple of things that they agreed upon was they agreed to ban Protestant books, and they agreed to reaffirm some practices of the Catholic Church. And that was pretty much it. The Counter-Reformation, however, it still managed to keep Catholicism as the main religion in Western Europe and the Mediterranean region. Catholic nations began to colonize Spain, Portugal, and as it spread to the New World, they began to transfer those religions to those peoples as well. Protestantism, or Lutheranism, did spread. It actually is even going to lead Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, to leave behind his throne. He felt like he had failed by failing to stop Lutheranism from spreading, so he actually steps down as the Holy Roman Emperor and leaves the title to, well, he divides it. He divides it between his brother and between his son. And then many German nobles are actually going to support Lutheranism in Germany. And this is not necessarily because they were believers or followers of Lutheranism as a religion. It's also because they didn't want to have the Pope interfering in their business either. So they didn't want to have connections to Rome. And so that's why they strongly supported Lutheranism in their countries. Some major wars of religion I mentioned Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. He's going to fight the German Lutherans, which is going to end with the Peace of Augsburg. The Peace of Augsburg allowed each German state to choose its ruler and whether or not the people of this territory would be Catholic or Lutheran. In France, the Catholics are going to fight the Protestant Huguenots for over 50 years. It's going to be a very, very bloody, very violent wars between the two groups. Henry IV, the King of France, is actually going to try and end this practice by becoming Catholic himself. He said, or he's famously is known for saying, Paris is well worth a mass. So the city of Paris, it's worth it. If it means peace for my people, I might as well convert to Catholicism. He would issue the Edict of Nantes, which allowed Huguenots to practice their faith, which was allowed the country to be able to remain under peace for about 87 years. Then you have the 30 Years' War, which was conflict that started in the Holy Roman Empire. It says Germany in parentheses because that's pretty much where it was at the time, but it eventually would extend to all nations of Europe. It is going to have devastating consequences for Europe. It's going to bring a lot of famine, a lot of disease, a lot of war, a lot of death, as you can obviously tell. It's going to end in the Peace of Westphalia, which allowed each region or each ruler of that territory to basically choose now between Catholic, Lutheran, and Calvinist. So they added one new religion to the group. The thing that is going to have long-lasting consequences is that it's going to give a lot more power to the people in this area. So each portion is now getting to choose the religion that they want to have or practice their faith in. And so these religions or these areas are going to become powerful through the unification of religion. So, for example, you're going to see Prussia and Austria are going to begin to assert themselves as independent nations because they don't want to be tied to the Holy Roman Empire anymore. The Islamic groups. So we did talk about these when we talked about the gunpowder empires. You have the Ottoman, Safavid, and Mughals. The Ottoman or the Islamic schism has to do with the difference between Sunni and Shia. So Sunnis, it's about 85% of Muslims in the world. They are the ones that do not believe that it should be an ancestral thing. They believe that they should vote. It should be a community decision, not a birthright. Shia believe that it should be ancestral, that it should be passed down from bloodline to bloodline. And it only makes about 15% of Muslims in the world. So there are some differences. Under the Ottoman Empire, Islam was the dominant religion. They did use Sharia law to consolidate rule. So Sharia law is very, very strict. However, under Sunni Islam, there is some tolerance amongst the sultans because the sultans can pretty much administer what's kind of known as like a giza or a tax. And this tax allows non-believers or non-Muslims to exist within their kingdoms as long as they continue to pay. And they don't have to go to war or they don't have to pray to the certain religion. They kind of live in these, what they would eventually call, I want to say it's millets, but I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure it's millets. The millet system. So they're kind of like little neighborhoods or little sections where it's like Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and they live like in these areas. The Safavids are Shia Islam. That's the dominant religion in their region. Their rulers would deny legitimacy to any Sunni rulers. It's going to create hostilities, which we talked about, especially when it comes to trade. However, it was mandatory to be a Shiite. So if you lived in the Safavid kingdoms, it wasn't a question about paying a tax at all. You had to convert or leave. Under the Mughal Empire, this one was a little bit different because under Akbar, remember, he was the guy who earns the nickname Akbar the Great for unifying the empire, for trying to consolidate and fix relationships between Hindus and Muslims, and even then creating other blended religions and blended cultures as well. So it's going to be a lot more tolerant under Akbar's rule. Under his successors, however, it's going to go back to being extremely strict Islamic religious rulers, and it's going to eventually lead to the downfall of that part of the kingdom. And then very, very lastly, the wars on religion are going to be kind of blindsided by the scientific revolution because in the 1600s, Europe is going to explode with scientific thinking and the ideas of the Renaissance like curiosity, discovery, investigation, inventions, technology, things that are very, very modern for them. And it's going to really challenge their ways of thinking from here on out, especially in terms of the church being the dominant power because the scientific revolution is going to put into question everything that they have ever believed or thought to be true. And so we'll get into that a little bit later. But it's during this time that the scientific revolution really asks people to think and use reason and rationalism. This is like what's known as empiricism, to really use their brains and come up with legitimate reasons behind why things happen the way they do or why things are the way they are, and not just because God says so, or so-and-so says so, or this is how it's always been done, or maybe because the ruler says so. They're going to actually start to ask a lot more of those why questions, and it's going to eventually lead to the Enlightenment. Okay, so tomorrow, we are going to practice a timed writing passage response to your DBQ AP exam. I have already assigned it, like I said, in Google Classroom. It'll be available starting at 11 a.m. tomorrow. I will send out another remind notice to you guys on Google Classroom so that you remember to log in at a certain time. So the window opens at 11 a.m. The window is going to close at 11:50 a.m. So in the morning, it's a 50-minute window. And the reason for that is because when you take the AP exam, you guys have 45 minutes. You have 45 minutes to read the DBQ and write it. And then you're going to have a 5-minute window to upload it. So kind of like the same thing, I'm giving you 50 minutes. The assignment is already up there. It's an attachment. You do have to kind of go through it and look to see where it is, because the assignment itself doesn't actually begin until page 5. And I put it several times there. You are only to do the DBQ section of the packet. Only the DBQ. It starts with the SAQs, the short answer questions, DBQs in the middle, and then the long essay questions in the end. You're only doing the DBQ. It starts on page 5 in the attachment. You're going to either have to type your response on a Word document and then upload that to me, or you can write it out and send me screenshots from your phone or pictures of your writing assignment. Just make sure it's legible and that I can read it and that I can see it, and I will give you guys feedback. I don't want you guys to stress a whole lot. This is a trial run. This is just to see if you guys can do it under the time constraints. It's very, very difficult because we've never done it online before, so I get it if there's going to be some hiccups and things like that, but we do need to start practicing now, so we at least have a whole month of, trial and error and figuring out all these other things to worry about when we get closer to that time frame. Okay, so the way that you guys are going to be graded is a different rubric. It is based off of 10 points. You have a question. It's up there. You have 5 historical sources. The DBQ that you guys have actually has a lot more than that. I want to say it has 7, but you only have to use 4. So it's 4 up to your choosing. You get 1 point for writing the thesis. You get 1 point for the context. You get 3 points for using 4 documents. You get 2 points for using any kinds of outside information. You get 2 points for using HIP. And you get 1 point for the complexity. I'm actually going to put this up there and attach it separately as another Word document. That way you guys can see it as you're looking at it. That way you don't have to be going back and forth. But if you have any other questions before here until then, let me know. I hope it works. It's, again, don't stress out too much about it. I want you guys just to get a feel for it so that we can see if there's anything else or any other problems that we have to work out before the actual AP exam. And that's pretty much it. So I'll see you guys later. Bye.